She found the baby in the hollow of a dead oak, wrapped in embroidered silk that shimmered even in the pre-dawn gloom. The crying had stopped. That's what made Grace's heart seize with recognition. She knew that silence had lived inside it for 3 months. Grace pressed 2 fingers against the infant's throat, searching for a pulse she wasn't certain existed. The skin was ice-cold, translucent as parchment stretched over bones too small, too visible. The baby's lips had gone the color of a winter sky, pale blue at the edges, deepening to violet at the center. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, stuttering breaths. For days, maybe 5, since it had last fed. She could read it in the hollowed cheeks, in the way the tiny fingers curled inward like frost-killed petals. Grace had seen death by starvation before. In the Boston tenements during the war shortages, she learned to recognize the signs. The stillness. The terrible quiet. The way life slipped through your fingers no matter how tightly you held on. "Not you," she whispered, lifting the baby from its silk shroud. "Not today." The woods pressed close around her, ancient Carpathian forest that the other servants whispered was cursed, where even wolves wouldn't den. She shouldn't have been out here at all. But the castle felt like a tomb at dawn, and Grace had learned that moving was easier than thinking. The baby stirred against her chest, making a sound barely louder than breath. Its eyes opened just slightly, not the blue or brown of human infants, but a dull rust red, like old blood dried on stone. Dying eyes. She'd seen them once before, in a different face, in a different country. The baby was a damper, she realized with a jolt that was equal parts terror and recognition. Half human, half vampire. She could see it in the delicate features, the way mortal softness blended with something sharper, more eternal. The tiny points of ears that would grow more pronounced with age. The small fangs just visible beneath lips that trembled with each shallow breath. Someone had abandoned a damper infant in the forbidden woods. Someone had left it to die where winter and wolves would erase the evidence. Grace's hands trembled as she unlaced the front of her wool dress. She'd done this 1,000 times before with Lily. The familiar motion adjusting fabric, supporting the small head, bringing new life against her heart. But this wasn't Lily. This was a vampire child, or half-vampire at least. This was forbidden in ways that could cost more than her position. Servants didn't touch vampire children. Servants certainly didn't breastfeed damper infants that someone powerful had clearly wanted dead. She should return to the castle. Wake the head housekeeper. Report what she'd found and let wiser people decide its fate. She should lay the basket back in the hollow oak and walk away. Let nature finish what cruelty had started. The baby's breathing hitched. Stopped. Started again with a rattle that spoke of hours, not days. Grace pulled the infant against her chest. The small mouth found her instinctively, latching with a desperation that made her gasp. The pull was stronger than Lily's had ever been, even in those early days when her daughter had nursed constantly. Vampire babies were born hungry. They needed more, faster, with an urgency that human infants didn't possess. This one drank like someone drowning, finally breaking the surface. Grace felt the familiar sensation of letdown, the flood of milk responding to demand, to need, to the ancient contract between mother and child. The baby's throat moved in rapid swallows. The blue tinge around its lips began to fade, replaced by the faintest hint of pink. Its fingers uncurled, one tiny hand pressing against her skin as if anchoring itself to life. Minutes passed. The baby didn't stop. Grace shifted her weight, bracing her back against the oak's rough bark, supporting the small head more carefully. She should have been terrified. She was breaking laws older than the castle itself. If caught, she'd be dismissed immediately. Or worse. The vampire courts didn't tolerate humans who overstepped their bounds, who interfered with matters of blood and lineage. But all she felt was the rightness of it. The way the baby's breathing steadied. The way its body began to warm against hers. The way life flowed from her into this dying child, the way it hadn't been able to flow into Lily when the fever took her too fast, too young. When the baby finally pulled away, its eyes opened fully for the first time. Still red, but brighter now, alert. The rust color had deepened to something closer to garnet's catching firelight. It looked at her with an intensity that seemed impossible for something so small, so recently pulled back from death's edge. Grace stroked the soft dark hair, barely more than down against the tiny skull. She noticed the pointed tips of the ears, more pronounced now that color had returned to the baby's face. The small fangs that would grow sharper, more deadly with age. This child would never be fully vampire, never be fully human. It would live between worlds, belonging to neither, claimed by both. "Who left you?" Grace whispered. "What kind of monster abandons you like this?" The baby made a soft sound, not quite a coo, pressing its face against her, already seeking comfort beyond just food. Already learning that this person meant safety, meant warmth, meant the difference between dying in the cold and living another hour. Grace heard movement in the forest behind her. The snap of frozen branches, the crunch of boots on frost-hard ground. Palace guards making their dawn patrol along the wood's edge. She froze, heart hammering, suddenly aware of how this must look, a servant with her dress unlaced, a vampire baby in her arms, alone in the forbidden forest at first light. She could claim she'd just found the child, was trying to help. But the evidence of what she'd done was obvious in the baby's improved color, its steady breathing, the way it rested contentedly against her skin. No one would believe she'd discovered it moments ago. The footsteps passed without pausing, the guards moving deeper into the trees, away from her. They hadn't seen her in the oak shadow. Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was insane. She needed to return to the castle, hide the baby somewhere safe, figure out what to do. But as she stood, adjusting her dress and wrapping the silk around the infant, she felt movement against her. The baby's small hand had fisted in her clothing, holding on with surprising strength for something so newly revived. "Don't leave," that grip seemed to say. "Don't abandon me too." Grace looked down at the baby in her arms, at the rust-red eyes that had brightened to garnet, at the tiny hand clinging to her, at the chest that now rose and fell with steady, living breaths. She thought of Lily. Of the grave in Boston she'd fled 3 months ago, unable to bear standing beside it one more day. Of her body's cruel refusal to understand her daughter was gone, continuing to produce milk for a child who would never need it again. She thought of this baby's desperate hunger. The way it had fought for life even as life slipped away. The decision had already made itself, really, the moment she'd pressed her fingers to that cold throat and felt the pulse still fluttering underneath. "You're coming with me," she whispered. "And God help us both." Chapter 1. Hidden in Stone. Grace slipped through the servants' entrance at dawn, the baby hidden beneath her cloak, pressed against her racing heart. Castle Corvinus rose around her like a stone giant, its Gothic spires clawing at the gray sky. She kept her head down, moving through corridors she knew would be empty at this hour. The abandoned tower wing waited at the castle's eastern edge, a place where even the boldest servants refused to venture. The stone stairs spiraled upward into darkness, each step groaning under her weight. Dust hung thick in the air. Cobwebs stretched across doorways like warnings. The third-floor chamber had a lock that still worked. Grace pushed inside and her breath caught. Forgotten furniture huddled beneath white sheets like ghosts. A broken cradle sat in the corner, its wood still solid despite decades of neglect. She laid the baby on a moth-eaten cushion and began her examination with the clinical precision of her nursing training. His gums were too sharp for a newborn, tiny ridges where fangs would emerge. When he nursed, his eyes reflected the dim light like a cat's, shifting from rust to deep garnet. Most impossibly, he could already hold his head up, tracking her movements with unnatural focus. "You're not human," she whispered, fear and wonder tangled in her throat. That evening, she crept to the castle library while the other servants ate dinner. Ancient texts spoke of Dampiers in hushed, horrified terms. Abominations. Cursed unions. Children who belong nowhere, claimed by neither world. The vampire courts viewed them as stains on pure bloodlines, threats to be eliminated. Grace's hands shook as she read. She'd saved something the entire supernatural world wanted dead. A floorboard creaked behind her. "What are you reading, American?" Old Marta's voice cut through the silence. The head housekeeper stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes narrowing at the open book. "And why do you smell like milk?" Grace's blood turned to ice. Her hand moved instinctively to cover the page, but it was too late. Marta had seen the illustrations of damper infants, the warnings written in 3 languages. The old woman's face drained of color. "What have you done?" Before Grace could answer, a baby's cry echoed down from the eastern tower. Thin, hungry, unmistakably inhuman in its urgency. Marta's eyes went wide with understanding and horror. "Mother of God, you brought one here, into the king's own castle." Chapter 2: The King in Shadows. Marta's silence cost Grace 3 weeks of borrowed time and half her wages. The old woman said nothing, but her eyes followed Grace everywhere, heavy with judgment and fear. Grace's life became a careful rhythm of survival. Feed Lucian every 2 hours. Steal clean linens from the laundry. Avoid the eastern corridors during guard rotations. Sleep in fragments between the baby's needs. Lucian's development terrified her. At 1 week old, he could sit unsupported, his spine impossibly straight. His eyes tracked movements across the room with predatory focus. When she whispered to him, he turned toward her voice like he understood every word. "My little light," she murmured, because in the darkness of that tower, he was the only thing that felt real. Then the searches began. Grace heard it first in the servants' hall. The king himself had ordered every chamber inspected, every shadow investigated. Guards moved through the castle like a slow-moving plague, getting closer to the eastern wing each day. She saw him for the first time in the Great Hall corridor. Stefan Corvinus moved like winter itself, tall and broad-shouldered, dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His eyes were gray as storm clouds, but when a servant dropped a tray, they flashed crimson for just a heartbeat. His accent carried the weight of centuries, each word precisely chosen, perfectly controlled. He looked right through Grace as she pressed herself against the wall. Just another invisible servant. Nothing worth noticing. That night, she found the records in the castle archive. Katerina Delka, human merchant's daughter, dead 3 months past in childbirth. No mention of a child surviving. The timeline crashed over Grace like ice water. 3 months. The same age as the baby she'd found. The baby with Stefan's sharp cheekbones, his intense stare. "Oh God," she breathed. "Lucian is his son." She'd been hiding the vampire king's heir. A footstep echoed behind her in the tower's stairwell. Grace spun, heart-stopping. Stefan Corvinus stood in her doorway, his eyes locked on the cradle where Lucian slept. "I've been following your scent for 3 days," he said softly, deadly. "Milk and fear and something else. Something that smells like my blood." Chapter 3: Blood and Truth. Grace moved without thinking, placing herself between the vampire king and the cradle. Her hand found the iron poker by the fireplace. "You'll have to kill me first." Stefan Corvinus went utterly still. Then he stepped into the lamplight and Grace saw his face properly for the first time. He was staring past her at the sleeping infant, and his expression was crumbling like ancient stone. "It can't be," he whispered. "They told me he was dead." He moved closer with inhuman speed. Grace raised the poker, but Stefan wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Lucian with an intensity that made the air feel thick. "He has her eyes," Stefan said, his voice breaking. "Katerina's eyes. And my... God, those are my features." The baby stirred, sensing something. His eyes opened, that distinctive garnet glow, and locked onto Stefan. The recognition was instant, primal. Damper children knew their bloodline. Stefan's knees hit the stone floor. The Vampire King, centuries old and feared across empires, collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. I met her during trade negotiations, he said, words tumbling out like confession. Katerina. She was human, forbidden, everything I shouldn't want. We hid the pregnancy for months. When her time came, I wasn't allowed near the birthing room. Blood court rules. His hand shook. The midwife brought me her body. Told me the child had been stillborn. That they'd buried him already, according to human custom. I believed her. Someone lied to you, Grace said quietly. Someone stole him. Left him to die in the woods where wolves would erase the evidence. Stefan's eyes met hers, and they were pure crimson now, bright with rage and grief. 3 months I've been searching. Following whispers. Fragments of rumors about a baby in silk. He stood slowly, approached the cradle. May I? Grace hesitated, then nodded. Stefan lifted Lucian with reverent care. The baby made a soft sound, one tiny hand reaching up to touch his father's face. The Vampire King broke. Grace watched him weep silently, this ancient creature holding his son for the first time, and something in her chest cracked open. This wasn't a monster. This was a father who'd lost everything. Who? Stefan finally asked, voice like gravel. Who told you he was dead? I don't know yet. But the trail leads to the blood court. To people who thought a Damper heir was an abomination worth murdering. He looked at Grace with new eyes. You saved him. You've been feeding him, hiding him, protecting him at the cost of your own life. I couldn't let another baby die, Grace said simply. Stefan's jaw tightened. I need someone I can trust. Someone who's already proven they'll die for him. Be his guardian. Official. With my authority behind you. I have conditions, Grace said, finding courage she didn't know existed. I maintain primary care. No separation from Lucian until I say otherwise. And I have full authority to act in his defense. Against anyone. Stefan didn't hesitate. Agreed. All of it. Even if that anyone is you? Especially then. He handed Lucian back to her carefully. Grace Winters, you are now royal guardian to Prince Lucian Corvinus. Your word is law in all matters concerning my son. Stefan reached out slowly, touching Lucian's soft hair. The baby gripped his finger, holding on. Forgive me, the king whispered. Forgive me for not finding you sooner. A door slammed somewhere far below in the castle. Footsteps echoed up the tower stairs, multiple sets, moving fast. Stefan's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes blazed crimson. They know I'm here. They know I found him. He looked at Grace, and for the first time, she saw real fear in his face. We're out of time. They're coming to finish what they started. Chapter 4, Court of Knives. The royal wing felt like a gilded cage. Grace's new quarters connected directly to Stefan's through a heavy oak door that remained unlocked, a silent invitation she didn't know how to interpret. Silk curtains replaced rough wool. A proper cradle replaced her makeshift nest. But luxury couldn't mask the danger pressing in from all sides. The blood court summoned her on the third day. She entered the chamber with Lucian in her arms, feeling every eye like a blade against her skin. Ancient vampires filled the space, their collective age pressing down like atmospheric pressure. At the center sat Lord Draven, silver-haired and cruel-eyed, his disgust so palpable Grace could taste it. The American servant, he said, voice dripping venom. Playing nursemaid to an abomination. Stefan's hand found the small of her back, steadying. Royal guardian, he corrected coldly. She speaks with my authority. Remember that. But Draven's eyes, when they fell on Lucian, held pure hatred. Grace pulled her son closer. The visits began after that. Nobles appearing with thin excuses, studying Lucian like he was a curiosity in a museum. Grace learned to read them the way Stefan taught her. "Watch their eyes," he'd whispered. "Vampires can control their faces, but eyes always tell the truth." Some looked with pity, others with calculation. Draven's followers looked with murder. At night, Stefan learned to be a father. Grace watched him hold Lucian with increasing confidence, his large hands gentle as he bathed the baby, singing Romanian lullabies in a voice that made her chest ache. The contrast shattered her. By day, he was the ruthless king who'd ruled for centuries. By night, he was just a man trying to know his son. "You're good at this," Grace said one evening as Stefan rocked Lucian to sleep. "I had practice once. A daughter before she..." He stopped. "A long time ago." Grace understood grief in his silence. She'd been writing to Lily in her journal, pages of apologies and explanations. "I found another baby to protect. I hope you don't hate me for it. I hope you understand." Lucian was thriving impossibly fast. 2 weeks old and already crawling, pulling himself up on furniture, making sounds that almost formed words. His development terrified and amazed in equal measure. Then Grace noticed the scratches on her window. Fresh. Deliberate. Someone had been climbing the tower wall, watching them. She told Stefan, who went very still. "Stay here," he commanded, then disappeared into the night. He returned at dawn, fury carved into every line of his face. "I followed Draven tonight. He met with a midwife who lied to me. They're planning something." "What do we do?" Grace asked, fear clawing up her throat. Stefan moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "We draw them out. Force their hand before they're ready." "But Grace..." He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features. "I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Grace thought of her late husband Lucas, how trust had become a weapon he'd used to hurt her. How promises had turned to lies, safety to danger. Stefan was asking for the same leap of faith that had nearly destroyed her once before. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. Stefan took her hand, pressed it against his chest where his heart beat slow and steady. "I won't let anything happen to either of you. You have my word. And my word is blood, Grace. It's the only currency that matters in my world." Before she could respond, a scream echoed through the castle. A servant's voice, shrill with terror. Stefan's eyes flashed crimson. He moved to the window and went rigid. "What?" Grace demanded. "What is it?" He turned back to her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw real fear in his face. "Fire. They've set fire to the eastern wing. Where we moved from. Where they think Lucian still sleeps." His voice dropped to something deadly. "It started. They're making their move tonight." Bells began ringing throughout the castle, urgent and discordant. Footsteps pounded in the corridors outside. Shouting. Chaos spreading like plague. Stefan grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me very carefully. What happens next, you may hate me for. But everything I do to keep him safe. Remember that." "Stefan, what are you?" The door burst open. Palace guards flooded in, but not Stefan's personal unit. These wore Draven's colors. Lord Draven's orders, their captain announced. "The damper child is to be secured immediately. For his own protection, of course." Stefan didn't move. Didn't protest. Just stepped aside. Grace's world tilted. "Stefan, no. You promised." He met her eyes, and she saw something there she couldn't read. Calculation. Strategy. Or betrayal. "Take them both," Stefan said quietly. "To the secured chambers. Now." As rough hands grabbed her arms, as Lucian began to wail, Grace realized with horror that she'd made the same mistake twice. She'd trusted a man who'd just handed her and his son directly to their enemies. Chapter 5. The Trap is Set. The guards dragged Grace through corridors that twisted like a maze, but instead of dungeons, they delivered her to a war room where Stefan waited. The moment the door closed, his mask dropped. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "But Draven needed to see me cooperate. Needed to believe I'd given up." Grace's slap cracked across his face. "Don't ever do that again." Stefan accepted it without flinching. "I won't. But Grace, listen. This is our chance. I'm going to stage a border crisis, make it look like I'm leaving the castle vulnerable. They'll strike then, thinking you're unprotected. You want to use us as bait?" Horror flooded through her. "I need proof. Vampire law requires witnesses, evidence. If I act without it, the blood court will fracture into civil war." His eyes burned with intensity. "But I will never be more than 2 minutes away. I swear it on Katarina's memory." Grace looked at Lucian sleeping against her chest, then back at Stefan. "Show me how to kill them." For the next 3 days, Stefan trained her. Iron daggers that could pierce vampire hearts. Weak points in their anatomy where even human strength could deal damage. He placed spelled mirrors throughout her quarters, invisible watchers that would record everything. Hidden guards in the walls, ready to intervene at his signal. The night before the plan's execution, Stefan brought her a necklace. Silver filigree woven with protective charms. His hands shook slightly as he fastened it around her neck. "If I could spare you this, I would," he whispered. Grace caught his hand. "I'm not fragile, Stefan. I'm a mother. We're the most dangerous creatures alive when our children are threatened." Something shifted in his expression. Respect deepening into something else, something neither of them had time to name. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She held Lucian, singing soft American lullabies her own mother had sung. Songs about mockingbirds and diamond rings, about safety that felt like lies in the darkness. Stefan appeared in her doorway. Without words, he sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. They watched Lucian together, two people who'd lost everything learning to protect what remained. "Tell me about Katarina," Grace said softly. Stefan's voice broke as he spoke. How they'd met during peace negotiations. How she'd laughed at his formal speeches. How she'd faced pregnancy knowing it might kill her but chosen life anyway. "She was braver than I ever was," he finished. "Lily loved flowers," Grace whispered. "She'd reach for them even when fever made her too weak to move. I buried her with daisies." Stefan's hand found hers in the darkness. "We've both lost so much. But maybe we can keep from losing more." Dawn came too quickly. The messenger arrived as planned, shouting about border incursions, demanding the king's immediate presence. Stefan stood in Grace's doorway, fully armored, looking every inch the warrior king. 2 minutes, Grace reminded him. 2 minutes, he promised. Then softer, almost inaudible, "Stay alive, Grace." For him. He stopped. "Just stay alive." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down stone corridors, fading into silence. Grace was alone with Lucian in the tower. The spelled mirrors glinted in corners. Iron weapons lay hidden within arm's reach. Everything was ready. Except her hammering heart. Lucian whimpered, sensing her fear. Grace pulled him close, feeling his rapid damper heartbeat against her chest. "It's okay, little light. Your father won't let anything happen to us." The words felt like prayer. Hours passed. Grace nursed Lucian, changed him, tried to maintain normalcy while her nerves screamed. The castle felt too quiet. Even the usual sounds of servants and guards had vanished, as if the entire fortress was holding its breath. Sunset painted the sky blood-red through the tower window. That's when Grace heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Multiple sets. Moving with predatory certainty. Not the heavy boots of Stefan's guards. Something lighter. Faster. Wrong. She reached for the iron dagger, positioned herself between the door and Lucian's cradle. Her hands shook, but her grip held firm. The footsteps stopped outside her door. A voice she recognized spoke through the wood, smooth as poisoned honey. Grace Winters. American whore playing at nobility. Lord Draven's accent made her name sound like a curse. Give us the abomination, and perhaps the king will find enough of you left to bury beside your bastard daughter. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. 3 vampires entered. Draven flanked by 2 enforcers, all of them moving with the casual confidence of apex predators cornering prey. Grace raised the dagger. Stay back. Draven smiled, fangs gleaming. The king is 3 hours away, fighting phantom enemies I invented. His hidden guards. He gestured casually. A body fell through the doorway, throat torn open. One of Stefan's men dead. Already dealt with. You're alone, little human. Completely, utterly alone. Lucian began to cry, sensing the danger, the hatred poisoning the air. Draven's eyes locked on the cradle. On the baby. On the last living piece of Stefan's heart. Now, he said, stepping forward. Let's finish what should have been done 3 months ago. Chapter 6, Blood and Iron. Grace moved on instinct. She grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and swung it in a vicious arc. The metal connected with Draven's temple, and the ancient vampire screamed as his flesh sizzled and burned. You little. He staggered back, one hand pressed to the blackened wound. The enforcers lunged. Grace used the cradle as a barrier, keeping her body between them and Lucian. One vampire grabbed for the baby. Grace drove the poker through his hand, pinning it to the wooden frame. His shriek was inhuman. But the other enforcer was faster. He caught Grace from behind, arms crushing around her ribs. She heard something crack, felt white-hot pain explode through her chest. The poker clattered to the floor. No, Grace thrashed, but vampire strength was absolute. The enforcer's grip tightened until she couldn't breathe. Draven wiped blood from his burned face, his expression transforming into something monstrous. He reached into the cradle and pulled Lucian out by one small arm. The baby's screams tore through the air. Do you know how easy it would have been? Draven said conversationally, dangling Lucian like a doll. Katerina never should have survived the pregnancy. A little poison in her tea. The midwife was so cooperative once we explained the situation. And when the half-breed somehow lived despite our efforts. He smiled. Well, abandoned babies die in the woods every day. No one questions it. Grace's vision was graying at the edges, but she could still see Lucian struggling in his grip, could still hear his terrified cries. Maternal rage burned through the pain like wildfire. She bit down hard on the enforcer's arm. Vampire blood flooded her mouth, bitter and cold, but his grip loosened just enough. Grace twisted, drove her elbow into his throat, broke free gasping. Draven had moved toward the window. Lucian held out over the glass. The king's precious heir. Let's see if damper babies bounce. The window exploded inward. Stefan Corvinus came through in a cascade of shattered glass and primal fury. His eyes blazed pure crimson, fangs fully extended, moving faster than Grace's human sight could track. He caught Lucian midair as Draven dropped him in shock, then passed the baby to Grace in one fluid motion. What followed wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Stefan's hand went through the first enforcer's chest, emerging with the vampire's heart still beating. The body hit the floor as ash before it landed. The second enforcer tried to run. Stefan caught him by the throat and slammed him into the stone wall so hard the rock cracked. You touched my son, Stefan said, voice inhuman. You touched her. He ripped the enforcer's head from his shoulders. Draven backed toward the door, but palace guards poured in, Stefan's personal unit, all of them armed with spelled silver. They surrounded him in a circle of blades. The border crisis was resolved in 20 minutes, Stefan said, advancing on Draven with deadly calm. I've been in the walls since you arrived. Watching. Recording. He gestured to the spelled mirrors, now glowing with stored images. Everything you said. Everything you did. All of it witnessed and preserved. Draven's face went slack with comprehension. You used your own son as bait. I used your arrogance, Stefan corrected coldly. And my guards were seconds from intervening before harm came to them. Unlike you, I don't sacrifice children for politics. More guards flooded the chamber, dragging other conspirators. The old midwife. 3 blood court nobles. All of them caught in the coordinated sweep. Stefan turned to Grace, and his expression shattered. She was on her knees, clutching Lucian to her chest with one arm while the other hung uselessly. Blood stained her dress. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. Grace. He was beside her instantly, hands hovering like he was afraid to touch and cause more damage. God, Grace, I'm sorry. She looked up at him through pain-fogged eyes. You should have told me you were that close. Would you have played your part as convincingly? Grace's good arm moved. The slap cracked across his face hard enough to snap his head sideways. Don't ever lie to me again. Stefan accepted it, didn't even flinch. Never. I swear it. Grace tried to stand. Her legs buckled. Stefan caught her before she hit the floor, careful of her injuries, and lifted her as gently as he'd lift Lucian. The baby was pressed between them, still crying, safe in the cage of their bodies. Healers, Stefan barked. Now. Grace's vision swam. She was aware of movement, of being carried, of Lucian's weight against her chest. Stefan's voice rumbled through his chest, speaking in rapid Romanian, issuing commands. They reached the royal chambers. Healers swarmed, vampire physicians with gentle hands despite their predatory nature. Grace felt ribs being set, wounds being closed with supernatural precision. Pain receded under their ministrations, replaced by floating numbness. Through it all, Stefan never left. He sat beside her bed, holding Lucian when the healers needed both her arms free, passing him back the moment they finished. His hand found hers in the tangle of blankets. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered. Both of you. Grace squeezed his fingers weakly. Takes more than a few vampires to kill a Boston nurse. He almost smiled. Almost. Lucian had finally calmed, exhausted from terror and crying. He lay between them on the bed, one small hand gripping Grace's finger, the other tangled in Stefan's shirt, forming a bridge between them. What happens now? Grace asked. Now, Draven and his conspirators face trial. Public. Witnessed. They'll be sentenced to dawn. Stefan's expression went cold. Chained on the eastern battlements where the sunrise will turn them to ash. And Lucian. Acknowledged. Protected. Mine. Stefan's eyes met hers. Ours. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to examine. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. One of Stefan's guards entered, his face grim. Your Majesty. The prisoner Draven requests an audience. He claims he has information you'll want to hear. About other conspirators. Stefan's jaw tightened. Tell him to burn at dawn. He says there are others, Your Majesty. In positions you trust. He'll give names in exchange for a quick death instead of sunrise. Grace felt Stefan go rigid beside her. How many others? The guard swallowed. He claims a dozen. Maybe more. The conspiracy went deeper than we thought. Stefan looked at Grace, then at Lucian sleeping peacefully between them. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. We thought cutting off the head would kill the snake. But we only cut off one head. He stood slowly, carefully extracting himself from the bed without waking Lucian. Grace, I need to hear what he has to say. I'll have guards stationed outside this door. 20 of my most trusted. Your most trusted, Grace repeated hollowly. How do you know they're not part of it? Stefan froze. The question hung between them like poison. He had no answer. Because the truth was becoming horrifyingly clear. If Draven was telling the truth, if the conspiracy truly ran that deep, then nowhere in this castle was safe. No one could be trusted. Stefan's hand moved to his sword. Lock this door from the inside. Don't open it for anyone. Not the guards. Not the healers. His eyes met hers with desperate intensity. Not even me, unless I give you the code phrase. Katerina's favorite flower. Stefan. Just until I know who I can trust. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Turned back. Crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her forehead, quick and desperate. Stay alive. Please. Then he was gone. Grace sat alone in the royal chamber with Lucian, listening to the lock click from outside. 20 guards in the corridor, any one of whom could be an enemy. She pulled Lucian closer, feeling his small heartbeat against her chest. Reached for the iron dagger Stefan had left on the bedside table. Somewhere in the castle, Draven was giving up names, revealing how deep the rot went. And Grace realized with creeping horror that the real battle hadn't ended. It had just begun. Chapter 7, Dawn of a New House. Grace's ribs healed slowly, mortal bones knitting together, while vampire magic accelerated the process just enough to spare her the worst pain. Stefan never left her side during those first 3 days. He slept in the chair beside her bed, Lucian cradled against his chest, both of them keeping vigil. On the 4th day, Draven's trial began. The blood court assembled in the Great Hall, a cavern of stone and shadow where centuries of vampire law had been dispensed. Grace insisted on attending despite the healer's protests. She walked into that hall with her ribs wrapped tight, Lucian in her arms, and every eye turned to watch. The spelled mirrors played their recordings. Draven's voice admitting to Katerina's murder. His hand reaching for Lucian with killing intent. The conspiracy laid bare for all to witness. When the evidence concluded, Stefan asked if anyone wished to speak before sentencing. Grace stood. Pain shot through her chest, but she kept her spine straight, her voice steady. I'm not vampire. I'm not even nobility. But I'm his mother, and I will stand for him. The hall erupted in whispers. Some vampires looked at her with grudging respect, others with pure hatred. Grace held their stares until they looked away. Stefan rose from his throne, and the chamber fell silent. Prince Lucian Corvinus, my acknowledged heir, born of my beloved Katerina, protected by Grace Winters. He paused, letting the words settle. I name Grace Winters blood guardian, by ancient right. She speaks with my voice in all matters concerning my son. To challenge her is to challenge me. More whispers. Blood guardian was an old tradition, nearly forgotten, where humans were given vampire authority to protect royal children. It had been centuries since one was named. This kingdom will adapt, Stefan continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute power, or it will find new leadership. My son is the future. Anyone who cannot accept that may leave my court. Now. 3 nobles stood and walked out. The rest remained, bending their knees in reluctant acceptance. Draven was sentenced to death by dawn. At sunrise, Grace watched from the eastern battlements as he and 6 other conspirators burned to ash in the morning light. She felt nothing but cold satisfaction. 2 weeks passed like a held breath slowly released. Lucian thrived with terrifying speed. At 1 month old, he had the abilities of a 6-month-old human baby. He babbled constantly, mimicking sounds, reaching for everything with curious hands. Grace read to him in English, while Stefan read Romanian folklore, filling their son's world with 2 languages, 2 cultures. One afternoon, they sat together in the castle gardens. Spring had finally arrived, bringing flowers and warmth. Lucian crawled through the grass, chasing butterflies with determined focus. When he caught one gently in his small hands, Grace laughed, and the sound surprised her. Real joy. Not the hollow echo she'd carried for months, but something genuine. Stefan watched them with an expression Grace was learning to read. Soft. Unguarded. The king's mask completely dropped. That evening, she wrote in her journal while Lucian slept. Dear Lily, I found another child to love. It doesn't mean I love you less. It means my heart was big enough for both. I hope wherever you are, you understand. I hope you forgive me for surviving. At sunset, Stefan found Grace on the western battlements, Lucian drowsing against her shoulder. He stood beside her, close enough that their arms touched. "This isn't what I imagined when I became king," he said quietly. "This isn't what I imagined when I fled America," Grace replied. They looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. "But maybe it's what we needed," they said simultaneously, then smiled at the coincidence. Lucian stirred, his eyes opening. He looked up at Grace, his small face serious with concentration. Then, clear as a bell, he spoke his first true word. "Mama." Grace's breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Stefan's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "He knows," he whispered. "He knows who his mother is." The three of them stood silhouetted against the sunset, a family formed not by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by the fierce determination to protect what mattered most. Grace pulled them both close, feeling Lucian's warmth and Stefan's steady presence, and for the first time since Lily died, she felt whole. "I came to Europe to escape my grief," she whispered into the fading light. "Instead, I found a dying baby in the woods. I never knew he was a prince. I only knew he needed me. And maybe I needed him just as much." Stefan kissed her temple, so gently it might have been imagined. "We all needed each other." Lucian babbled something that sounded like agreement, then reached for Stefan's face with chubby hands. Stefan caught them, kissed the small fingers, and Grace saw tears in his eyes too. They stood together as darkness fell, watching stars emerge over the Carpathian Mountains, three souls who'd found each other in the ruins of loss and built something new. Something that looked like hope. Something that felt like home. But in the shadows of the castle below, in corridors Grace couldn't see, a figure watched them through spelled glass. One of the nobles who'd stayed. One who'd bent the knee in false loyalty. The figure's hand moved to the seal on a letter already written, already addressed to the vampire councils in distant kingdoms. Councils who would be very interested to learn that Stefan Corvinus had elevated a human to blood guardian. That a damper heir now stood in line for the Eastern throne. The letter detailed everything. Lucian's existence. Grace's unprecedented authority. The weakness such attachments represented. And most importantly, it included a map of the castle. The royal wing. The nursery. Every entrance and exit. The figure sealed the letter with blood-red wax and handed it to a waiting messenger. "Ride fast," they whispered. "This information is worth more than gold to the right people." The messenger disappeared into the night, carrying news that would ripple across the vampire world like a stone thrown into still water. Above, Grace held Lucian close, believing they were finally safe. She had no idea the real war was just beginning. And this time, the enemy wouldn't be inside the castle walls. They were coming from outside. An army of them. Ancient vampires who viewed damper heirs as abominations that threatened their entire way of life. The siege of Castle Corvinus would begin in 3 days. But tonight, Grace Winters sang lullabies to her son and let herself believe in happy endings. Just for tonight.